Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the EverydayFI podcast, the show that explores the lives and stories of everyday people in the financial independence community. Today is the first episode of Meghan's money lessons. So, if you listened to the 6-month anniversary episode, I wanted to do some topic episodes, and I was going to start with some of my own money lessons because, well, that's what I know. And I actually have an idea for doing this in a different way in the future, but I'm going to start here and I will expand this out later. That's just a little tidbit. I'm not going to explain more right now, but I have some ideas to bring on prior guests to talk about topics. So that will be down the road a little bit, and I can't wait for that. But I wanted to call this Meghan's Money Lessons because I was going to do Meghan's Money Mistakes just because of the alliteration. It sounds so good. But I think that I don't really agree with the word mistakes. I think that in every mistake, there is a lesson. And so I prefer to call these my lessons rather than my mistakes. And a lot of these stories that I'm going to be chatting about are also not necessarily even things that I did wrong, but just the way that I approached certain things. So today's lesson is about buying my first property or properties. So I've bought 2 homes in the last few years, and I learned a lot from each purchase because I feel like every home's purchase is probably a little bit different, especially depending on why you're buying the home and what type of home you're buying, where you're buying it. It just can be a little bit different. Also, where you are financially, things like that. So, I guess to start off, my first home that I bought was in 2019, and it was a condo. And I kind of want to dive into why I felt the need to even buy a place in 2019. I was living in an apartment at the time that I really liked in Raleigh, North Carolina. And every day I would come home and I would be super happy. It was a 1 bedroom. It had a balcony. It had a fireplace, wood burning fireplace, and it had skylights in the kitchen, which was really cool. And it was an open concept. So it was really easy to have friends over and cook and entertain, and it was super comfortable. And I think the only complaint I had was my neighbors downstairs were loud, but they also worked for the apartment complex. So I felt a little bit more empowered to go down there and be like, hey, shut up. Anyway, but I think I wanted to buy because 2019 was when I was introduced to the FI movement, the financial independence movement. And I heard a lot about house hacking. And I was paying around $1,000 a month for this apartment. And I say around because there was the rent, but then there was also like valet trash and pest control. And if you needed to rent a washer and dryer for the hookup, or if you had your own, things like that, just added costs to it. But it was around $1,000 a month. And so I thought to myself, okay, if I bought a place that was also around $1,000 a month, or maybe even a little bit more, but had more room and more rooms that I could rent out and do this house hacking thing, then I would actually be able to save more money. And then I could also turn around, and if I wanted to upgrade and buy a house one day, I could use this intermediary property as like an investment. So I kind of approached my first foray into buying property as both buying a primary home and buying an investment property, which, as we know, is not the right way to approach it because buying a primary home is very different than buying an investment property. You look at very different things, and a lot of the time, the two kind of clash because buying an investment is more about the money you can make on that property rather than if you're going to enjoy living there. And I think I probably leaned a little too hard on the investment side of it. And so I ended up really not enjoying where I lived. And I guess at the time I was making more money than I had ever made in the past. I think my salary at the time was around $65,000. And in New York City, a few years prior, I had been making 55,000. So 55,000 at that time had been the most I'd ever made. And so making 65,000, I was like, woohoo, I'm flush with cash. And this was about 2019. And so I'm going around looking for places. And my first mistake was that I found a great place. It was a townhome. It was really cute. It was just in a cute little neighborhood, and I really liked it. I liked the layout. I mean, townhomes are pretty much all laid out the same, as I came to find out, but it was really cute to me. And I think I had these rose-colored glasses on because I kind of refused to see through the bad things. And I mean, I give myself a little bit of credit here because this was my first property. I also did not have a good real estate agent at the time. She was not the right fit for me. She mostly worked with large companies buying up a bunch of properties to turn them around and rent them out. Not exactly what I was doing. So I almost hardly ever saw her. She usually would have another one of her agents who she was coaching or teaching or whatever go out with me to properties. And so she really was not able to help me find a property that was really good. And I also was kind of new to the area. I think I'd lived in Raleigh, Durham for only about a year and a half at this point because I moved there in May of 2018. And this was actually, I'd only been there a year because this was around summer of 2019. And so I didn't really know the area that well. I only knew my own little small section, and my apartment was about 5 minutes from work. And so I just didn't know the area very well. So when I went to go look for places, I would ask her questions about the neighborhood. Is this a desirable neighborhood to live in? Is it up and coming? How are the crime rates? And she kind of refused to answer those questions. She was like, well, it depends. It depends. She just kept saying it depends. And I don't know if she was doing that because she was afraid of legal ramifications, which sure, fine if you're dealing with large corporations like she's used to, but I was a 30-year-old woman who just wanted to find a place that was safe for me to live when I was single. And she just was incredibly unhelpful. And then when I would make offers on places, she also wouldn't help me figure out what to offer. She would just say, well, just tell me what you think you want to offer, and then I'll write it up. Like she wouldn't give me any advice on it. It was very weird. I was not a fan. I did not use her for my second go round. Anyway, so I saw this cute place. I didn't really know the area very well, and I decided to make an offer on it. And in North Carolina, there is something called due diligence money that you have to put up. It's something that if you decide to back out of the deal, you do not get back. It's expected. Like there are no deals in North Carolina that do not have due diligence money because the sellers want to know that you are serious. I put down about $3,000 in due diligence money. And after I made the offer, I realized that it really wasn't right. After the rose-colored glasses came off and I went to the place again with the inspector and all these problems crept up, and then looked at some of the crime statistics in the neighborhood, and it really wasn't very safe. It was also off a really horrible road, meaning it was like one of those 6-lane non-highway roads that just got congested with traffic all the time. It was also super far away from the life I had established and my job. It was about, I think, like a 35-minute commute where I was used to like a 5-minute commute. And I just realized, wow, this is so not the right place for me. And instead of being excited about buying a home, I was having like panics at night. Oh my God, I can't believe I just bought this home. And so I called my real estate agent and I was crying because I was so upset that I had to back out of this thing and we had to do this all over again. And I felt like a fool. And I told her, I was like, I need to pull out of this deal. I can't live here. And so I lost $3,000 because of that. And it is what it is. But $3,000 to somebody who's only making $65,000 a year was kind of a big deal. And so I was really upset. I felt so stupid. But now I'm like, no, I wasn't stupid. I just was not being given very good information at the time and I didn't know what I was doing because I was a first time home buyer. This was my first home. So I didn't know what I was doing. After this, I was kind of put off on buying a home. And so I took a little bit of a break. And then one day I just decided to kind of look and see if there was anything else on Zillow. I was living in this apartment, like I said, and there were what I thought were other apartments next to my apartment complex. So in North Carolina, they have a lot of apartment complexes where they have like a front office where you go to the rental office and you talk to somebody and they let you fill out an application, things like that. It's different everywhere, but that's how North Carolina works, or at least in Durham, Raleigh, that's how that works. And so there was our set of buildings for our apartments. And then there was another set of buildings next to us that was separate. And so I just figured that was another set of apartments. But then I saw that there was places for sale over there. And I realized that it was actually a condominium complex and that there was a condo for sale. And I was like, oh, okay, well, this is the area that I know I like, and there's something for sale and it's in my price range. And so I was like, let's go look at this place. And when I went and looked at it, again, I had the rose colored glasses on, but I was also seeing it more from an investor's side. And so it was priced at, I think, 138, $138,000. And that was perfect for me because it was only about double my salary, which is what I was looking for. And then I also had to take into account the HOA, which I believe at that time was around $300. And so I think my monthly payment was like a little more than the apartment. I think it was like maybe $100 more, $150 more if I did the math. And so when I went to see the place, that's all I was kind of thinking about. And I noticed all the good things about the condo and not any of the bad things. So I noticed that it was all hardwood, or I should say laminate wood, because it definitely was not real wood. All of the windows were brand new, and it had 2 beds and 2 bathrooms, whereas I only had 1 bed and 1 bathroom. And it was actually quite large. It was a 1,200 square foot place, which was bigger than my apartment. My apartment, I think, was around 800 square feet. So all in all, to me, it was great. It was also on the top floor. It had high ceilings, and I just didn't really take note of the bad things. I mean, I did, and I mentioned them, but of course the agent talked me out of it. So like the second bedroom, for instance, had a smell, and I just figured I could probably clean it really good and get the smell out. But let me tell you, that smell was there to the day I moved out, and it smelled like body odor. I could not figure out where it was coming from because it was wood floors. There was no light fixtures. The windows were new. I had no idea where the smell was coming from because I literally cleaned it from top to bottom. I even had the ceilings scraped because they were popcorn ceilings, and it kind of smelled a little bit like cigarettes in there because I think somebody had smoked in there. And so I got the ceiling scraped, repainted, had it painted with one of those like odor blocking sealant types of paint. It didn't help. It still smelled bad in that room to the day I sold it. It's so weird. And then I didn't notice that the master bedroom was a couple degrees colder than the rest of the place. So this was around November that I was looking at it, November 2019. And I just chalked it up that the ceilings were high. And so the heat was just going up there. And come to find out that actually that room had issues with insulation. And I had no idea how to approach that when it came to a condo because you're sharing like walls and ceilings and stuff with other people. And so that room was always either several degrees hotter in the summer than the rest of the place or several degrees colder in the winter than the rest of the place. So that ate up a lot of my energy bills because that's the room that I was in most of the time. And so I didn't really think about any of this. Although the layout was just, I mean, I don't know who designed these dang condos, but it was stupid. It was just really dumb the way that it was laid out. The kitchen was also super dated, but that didn't really bother me. As long as it was usable, that's all I really cared about. But when I started actually living in the kitchen after going from a condo that actually had a pretty nice kitchen, it had like granite countertops, the cabinets were white with black hardware, it had stainless steel appliances, it had a really deep sink. When I went from that to this kitchen that was like those 1990s cabinets where it's like white and then it has a strip of wood at the bottom. If you guys know what I'm talking about, you can probably picture this. It was also a super small kitchen, and you had to walk around a wall to get into the kitchen and then walk back around to get out. It was really weird. And then the sink was really shallow. So anytime you washed anything, water would spray all over the countertops. And it was just, I remember when I moved in, I cleaned the top of the cabinets because it was one of those cabinets that didn't reach all the way to the ceiling. And the amount of grease and dust and dirt buildup from this condo was built in the 1980s. I don't think anybody had ever cleaned the top of these things. Was just really bad. And I mean, I was able to clean that up, but still, it was just bad. And then one of the biggest issues with this place were the pipes. And I didn't know this because, again, this is when the agent was kind of talking me around it. And she was like, oh, those aren't that big a deal. Everywhere in North Carolina has polybutylene pipes. But what I didn't realize is that when you buy a single family home with polybutylene pipes, your insurance company usually doesn't know that those pipes are in there. They're not going to ask, they're not going to check, they're not going to do any of that. So they're not charging you based on the fact that you have these pipes. Plus, you can replace them and then it's fine. But with a condo, the insurance company knew what pipes were in there. So the insurance company had to be this special insurance. And so it was super expensive. And that's why the HOA was so high, $300. And for people who are living in other places where they're like HOAs for $300, that's not that much. That's pretty dang high in North Carolina, especially given the fact that all they provided was, I believe, a pool and then the master insurance policy. And that was it. They didn't provide anything else. And I didn't know that the polybutylene pipes were that bad, but they kept exploding. And luckily I was on the top floor, but when they would explode, they would basically flood my bottom neighbor's place. And so she would be coming up and knocking on my door at 1 a.m. and be like, you have to turn your water off, because I had to turn my water off to make sure that her place wasn't flooded. And so I couldn't use my water, even though I wasn't having a problem with flooding. So it was terrible. And then there was like a lawsuit done against the company that put these in, but it was back in the 90s and the money had dried up. And this condo complex apparently had gotten the money, but didn't do anything about replacing any of the pipes because they were like, oh, that's just too hard to do for people who are living there. And half the time, the people who are living there aren't the owners, they're renters, which I get. But that basically meant that I could replace the pipes, sure, but I'd still be paying for this specialized insurance regardless. So to me, it didn't really make sense to do that and to rip, and these were all in the walls and in the floor. They would have had to rip up my floor, my neighbor's ceiling. It would have been a big to do. And so I just didn't want to do that. But every day I was just so worried that these pipes were going to bust. And so that was just, anyway, it was just one thing after another. And compounded on top of that, the whole idea of house hacking that I had with this place. The first roommate that I got, I was kind of in a crunch because when I bought the place, my lease on my apartment was not going to be up until March, and I closed on the condo in December. Unfortunately, the seller would not extend my closing time, even though I asked and said, my lease isn't up until March. Would you extend the closing? And she said no. The funny thing is, we actually saw each other in person, me and the seller. And she said, oh, if you would have asked, I would have done it. And I was like, I did ask, but okay. And so I was kind of in a crunch because I was basically paying a mortgage and a rent at the same time for about a month or two. And so I really needed to get a roommate to help cover some of those costs because it was basically like $2,200 a month. And on $65,000 a year, it was almost impossible to do that. And I had used all my savings buying the condo. Oh, and just to back up a little bit, I did not put 20% down. I put the lowest amount I needed to down because I couldn't afford 20% down. As a new home buyer, that's pretty typical though, from what I understand. So I put 3% down and I had PMI on the loan, which was not a big deal. It came off after 2 years, so it wasn't that big a deal. But anyway, I just wanted to add that in there that I only put 3% down, but that still was all my savings. So anyways, when I was looking for roommates, I hate to blame myself for this because there's really no way to know if somebody's going to be a good roommate or tenant until you really live with them. But I was desperate for people. So I kind of let the first person who I connected with personally move in. And I didn't do a background check. I did a credit check. She didn't have good credit, but she chalked it up to the fact that she really didn't have any credit. All she had was a student loan and nothing else. And so her credit score was low. And there wasn't anything in her credit report that said anything about like bankruptcies or anything like that. But I didn't do like a criminal background check or an eviction check or anything like that. I did get a referral from her previous person that she was living with, or I guess it was her current person. And she gave her a good referral, but like I also gave her a good referral when I wanted her to move out because I wanted her to move out and get the hell out. So she was awful. Just the most horrible roommate that you could possibly imagine. And when I say that, I don't think I could ever be on one of those episodes on Netflix where it was like, worst roommate ever. It wasn't quite that way, but when she moved in, she would do things like leave her clothes in the wash for several days. And so they'd get moldy. And then also, I couldn't use the washer. And that's not terrible, right? Like people do that. Some people aren't clean. But when I asked her, can you please not do that because it creates moldy clothes? And then I also can't use the washing machine. She would start yelling at me and calling me names. And I would be like, what is going on? I definitely thought this was a nice person. And come to find out, she was an alcoholic. And so she would drink all the time. And I had no idea. I mean, how do you know that? You can't, even if you ask somebody that, they're probably going to lie, right? And so she would get drunk. And when she was drunk, she was really mean. She was a mean drunk. And so that just made me feel like I couldn't set boundaries with her without her freaking out and yelling at me. And then she would bring random strangers over. And I remember her bringing one guy over that she had just met at a bar that night. And I did not have a good vibe from him. I don't know what it was, but something about him, I was like, this guy's creepy. And so I locked my door that night. And come to find out, she finds out that he was on the sex offender list, that he had raped an ex-girlfriend. And but she let him in their house. So it was terrible. And this was only like a couple months in. I bought this place in December 2019. And you guys know what happened in March 2020, right? The world shut down. And I was like, I cannot live with this person day to day, seeing her without murdering her. So I have got to move out. So I actually went and lived with my mom during COVID because this roommate was so bad. And because of COVID, I couldn't really kick her out because COVID put into protections like evictions and things like that. Now, I didn't really understand this, but for anybody who might be doing this, you can actually kick out anybody who is sharing your space with you because you're living in the exact same space and sharing a space. You can kick them out at any time. They have no right to be there, apparently. And I don't know if that's only a North Carolina thing, but I found that out later. But the thing was, I would be kind of afraid to kick her out without due cause because she was kind of a psycho. I was afraid she was going to burn my place down or something. And once I did end the lease, and believe me, she tried to talk me out of that so hard. And I was like, nope, I have somebody moving in 2 weeks after your lease ends, so you need to be out. So luckily, she did move out. But when she moved out, she had a party like the day or two beforehand, and there was spilled beer and food all over the floors, all over the walls. And I had to go through the whole place with bleach to clean it. And believe me, she did not get her security deposit back. And she tried to fight me on that, but I was like, absolutely not. I took pictures of how you left this place. No. And anyway, this whole story is to say that put an even bigger damper on I bought a property and I'm house hacking. Yay. It was horrible. It was so horrible. And I hate to say like recency bias, but it was just, I was like, oh my God, this whole house hacking thing is so not for me. And I did get another roommate after her who was a lot better, but never paid her rent. Just never. I always had to ask her for it. And she always said, oh, I don't have money right now. I have to pay you later. And so I kicked her out after about 6 months because she just never paid rent. I got it from her eventually, but I was like, no. And so I was like, I am so over this. I don't even want to live with anybody anymore. And this was before I found out about Furnished Finder, which is actually a really great place to find people because even if you are not exactly jiving with them, they leave after about 1 to 3 months. And so I didn't know about Furnished Finder, or else I would have used that the entire time, to be honest. but it just sucked. The whole thing sucked. I was just so tired of this condo. And I think the straw that broke the camel's back was the condo was like, hey, we need to replace the roof because it's leaking in some places. And they were going to make us pay for it because they didn't have enough money saved up in their accounts because the people who were running the HOA ran it really poorly. And so they had no extra money in their accounts. And so they were like, you guys all have to pay for this roof replacement. And so not only did I have to pay $350 a month because they also raised the HOAs 10% every year. And 10% is a big jump. But now they are adding on the cost of this roof to my HOA. So I think my HOA went up to $450. And that was just, I was done. I was like, I can't stand this place. I don't care that it's cheap to live. I just don't care. I don't even want to keep it to rent it out. And so I started looking for another place. And this was about, I want to say December 2021. Yeah, it was definitely December 2021 because I had met my partner that last April and he'd come to the condo. And the condo was actually quite far away from him. It was about 30 minutes away. And my job was near where he lived in Durham. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to look for a home in Durham because that's where my partner is. That's where my job is. It's cheaper there. I'm going to look there for a house. And so I looked for a house instead. And so I guess to say, you guys could probably hear all the mistakes that I made in this entire debacle with the condo. I didn't do my due diligence on the neighborhoods first. And so ironically speaking, I lost my due diligence money because I didn't do my due diligence. And then I didn't do my due diligence when it came to a roommate. And I didn't do my due diligence when it came to actually looking at the downsides of living in this condo. And so those were all of my mistakes that I learned from. And when I went to buy the next place, I was definitely more cognizant of those kinds of things. But that didn't prevent me from buying a place that was probably not the best choice. And again, it's so hard to buy a property. It really is, especially in a place where in Raleigh, Durham, it's a very tough market because there's not a lot of homes and there's a high demand for homes because one of Google's offices are here. I think Apple's coming soon. Epic Games is here. There's just a lot of tech and biotech here. And so there's a lot of people who want to buy homes. And it's always been like that. Even in 2008, when the market crashed, the market in Raleigh, all it did was flatten. It didn't go down. And now it flattened for several years, but it never, like people didn't lose value in their homes. And so there was a lot less of that, which was nice to know. So when I was looking for homes, I was looking for 3-bed, 2-bath, either townhome or single family home. And so I was looking and looking, and I would find places, put offers on them, and I would just get beat out by people who were either full cash offers or they'd go way over asking. And it was heartbreaking, especially the first one that I found was in January 2022. And it was the perfect home. It was 3 bedrooms, 2 bath, super cute. It was a single family home. So it needed some work. I think it needed gutters. There was a tree growing through the driveway. So the driveway was all crumpled up and that tree needed to be taken out. And then the crawl space needed a barrier in place. It was just the dirt. And I think maybe the HVAC was a little bit old. So it would need work. I mean, most homes do. And it did have the polybutylene pipes because it was built in the 1980s. But luckily, that meant that I could replace them and not have to worry about it ever again. So I guess I looked at this place as, yeah, it would probably need more work than a traditional condo or townhome, but it would give me a place to grow into because it was 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, which was exactly what I wanted for building a family. It also had a very low maintenance yard, so no grass, no anything. It was just a little garden with a little fence, and it backed onto a trail. So literally I could walk out of my back garden onto a trail, and it had a trail system in the neighborhood. It was beautiful. It was so perfect. I loved it. And it was the first home I saw, and it was at the beginning of when that COVID housing market spike happened during 2022. It was right at the beginning of that. And so I think it was listed for 300 and I think I put in an offer of 315 and it went for 350. So it went way over asking. And it's funny because my real estate agent at the time, Marie, who is fantastic, I absolutely love her and will use her again. She actually told me, I grew up in this neighborhood. This house is going to go for 350. And when we were talking about price, she was like, well, there was a comparable that sold in November. So if you wanted to go in at 315, that's probably a pretty strong offer. And I think she didn't even see this coming. This was the start of people freaking going hard on their offers and just going way over asking. And that's how it happened at every single house. And I got so fed up. I still think about that home to this day because it was so perfect. And I think I definitely want to live in that neighborhood eventually, especially when Chris and I start a family. That's definitely the neighborhood we want to be in because it's super walkable, super quaint, quiet. It has good school districts. It's safe and it's near everything. It's very central to shopping and it's central to our jobs and things like that. So eventually I probably will be in that neighborhood, but I didn't end up in that neighborhood. I ended up in a more artsy, a little bit more up and coming neighborhood. I really like it here. It's a very interesting neighborhood, very diverse, but it is a little bit less safe. So I had to get a security system. And the thing is I bought this place in May 2022. So that was only 5-month difference. And not even, I think I put my offer in April and I closed 30 days after that. So it was like 4 months between the first home and this home. And I think I had made offers on 8 or 10 properties. I cannot remember how many. It was so many. And so for the home I'm in now, I went $100,000 over asking and I put up $75,000 of due diligence money. Now, remember what I said in North Carolina, due diligence money means that if you back out of the deal, you do not get that money anymore. You have to give it to the seller. So that was me showing the seller, I'm dead serious about this house. And I remember falling in love with this house because I had seen a couple historic homes earlier than this and really liked them. I liked the layout. I liked the history. And so my house was built in 1925. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, which was smaller than I had anticipated, but I also thought, well, I can always add on to it. 1 bathroom is not a huge deal. I've lived with 1 bathroom before, and I've lived sharing a bathroom before. So it's not a huge deal that it's a 1 bathroom. And I guess to me, I thought 1925, it's still standing since 1925, and people had taken good care of it, it seemed. And there wasn't a lot wrong when the inspection report came back. There was like some small things. And I basically put every single ounce of savings that I had into this home. And I was able to sell my condo for $250,000. I had bought it for $140,000. So I made quite a bit of money. I made $100,000 off of it. But I put all of it into this house, either as a down payment or to fix it up. The kitchen was very old and dated and gross. And so I fixed up the kitchen a little bit. I didn't do a whole kitchen remodel, but I did paint the cabinets and replace the countertops, things like that. Replace some of the appliances that were old and gross and moldy and had roaches in them. Ugh, gross. But I did some of those update things. I also decided to replace the pipes because I was getting a lot of pipes breaking and kind of flooding the crawl space. And so I decided to do a repipe. But then every few months, something else would go wrong. So the furnace died. It was an 18-year-old furnace and it died. The roof started leaking, and apparently the roof needed to be replaced because it had wind damage, and the roof, I think, was like 15 years old, so it needed to be replaced. And just one thing after another. And the one that really kicked me in the teeth recently is it's a wood sided house, and the wood on the outside is original to the house, so almost 100 years old. And it started peeling off the house. And so somewhere the paint and the sealant that was holding the paint onto the house was damaged, and so water was getting in, and I didn't know it until I started seeing the warping and the boards coming away from the house. So when I consulted with people on this issue, they were like, well, yeah, you've got boards coming away here, but you've also got wood rot here. And they showed me all these places where the wood was literally black. And I was like, oh my God. And so they were like, really, the only way to do this is to replace the pieces that are damaged and then repaint the whole thing. So I had to do that. That was about $7,000. And so over the last 2 years and handful of months, I have spent, and I just did this math because I did a spreadsheet on all the expenses that I did for this house. I spent $55,000 on this house on both required things that needed to be done and updates that might not have needed to be done, but I did it anyway. For example, I added a bathroom because having one bathroom really wasn't working for me and my partner. So we added a half bathroom. And $55,000 in 2 years is a lot of freaking money. And so I wouldn't say buying this place was a mistake, but it definitely has derailed my FI timeline by a lot because it's also the most expensive housing payment that I've ever had. It's $2,000 a month. And anybody who says that a home is an investment, like a primary home is an investment, I can't agree with that, not after this house. And I realize that all of these expenses that I am paying for, some of them are one-time deals, and I'm not going to have to do it again for a long time. But it's still hard to have everything happen all at once rather than like over a 10-year period. And so I feel really strapped for cash right now. So anyway, those are the two stories of buying properties. You guys could probably sift through all of the mistakes that I made through all of that and learn from what I did and didn't do. I would say the core lessons that I learned from buying the condo and buying my current home are one, where matters more than what when buying real estate. You can always fix up a house, but you can't move it out of the area where you live. And I would say that even for the area I'm living in now. The area is interesting, but I don't want to be here forever. When I hear about my neighbor across the street, her house getting broken into and someone stealing a bunch of her stuff and she lived there alone, that terrifies me. I mean, she's literally across the street from me. I can see her house from my window right now. I also had somebody come to my door at 3 a.m. only about a week ago, pretending to be pregnant to try and get me to open the door. And I don't know why, if they wanted to rob me or what, but that's scary. That's really scary. And that's one of the reasons why I bought a security system. And I just really don't want to I don't want to have a family in a neighborhood like that. Like some people can live in places like that and feel fine. I don't want to raise my child in a neighborhood like that. I have the privilege to not, and so I'm not going to. So anyway, that just to say, I think Brad Barrett says on Choose FI that he bought the ugliest house in the best neighborhood. That's kind of the way to do it because you can fix an ugly house. You can fix ugly, but you can't move the house to the area you want to be in. So really think through that. So lesson number 2 is owning is stressful because you can't just call a landlord and fix things. You have to do it yourself. And you have to really weigh the level of fixing that you want to do. So for instance, with the pipes in my house, I could have just kept on patching every time that it exploded. But there was actually a moment where a pipe exploded an hour before I went out of town. And it was like none of the water was on either. I hadn't turned on a tap or anything. It just exploded on its own. If it had exploded an hour later, my whole crawl space would have been flooded. I mean, I'm sure the city would have turned the water off eventually, but my whole crawl space would have been flooded. My furnace is down there. My HVAC is down there. Those all would have been ruined. And the thing is, insurance companies don't cover that kind of stuff. They'll often cover the damage caused by the water, but they won't cover like replacing the pipes. And sometimes they won't even cover the damage depending on the damage. So that was really scary to me. So I decided to just replace all of the pipes. But you kind of have to weigh those decisions because replacing them one at a time is $200 versus replacing all of them was around $4,000. The same with the exterior, where I decided to replace all of the damage and have the whole thing repainted versus just fixing the damaged parts and having them just paint those. So that was a difference of, I think the repairs would have been $3,000 versus painting and repairing the whole house was $7,000. So I decided to do the whole thing because I just didn't want to have to worry about it. But now I'm worried about the fact that I have a loan that I am paying off. I used a 0% credit card to pay for this. And so I'm paying it off as if it's a 0% loan for 15 months. And so I have to worry about having enough money for that to pay off now because I didn't have enough emergency fund anymore because I had spent $55,000 on this house already. So that's another lesson that renting really can be less stressful because you don't have to worry about stuff like this. And even if you get people are like, oh, we'll just get a new build. New builds have their own issues from what I've heard from people who have them. There are builders who don't follow the letter of the law and they do things shoddily and things break. And it's just, you also don't know how the house is going to settle. And so things could crack and things could break because of that. So new homes also have their own challenges. Homeownership is expensive. Okay, so lesson number 3, HOAs are the worst. This may be just my own bias, and I've only had one HOA ever, but I hated having an HOA, and I will never have an HOA again unless it's like one of those small neighborhood HOAs that are like, oh, you pay $20 so that we sweep your sidewalks or pick up your trash or whatever. That's fine. But HOAs, when it comes to condos and townhomes, I would be super diligent about researching them and making sure they're doing the right thing and making sure they have enough of a reserve of money to cover big things. And also looking up things like when was the last time the roof was replaced by them? When was the last time they did a large project? What kind of pipes are in here? And do they have a master policy that are covering these weird pipes that should have been replaced in the 90s? Things like that. HOAs can be great as long as they're run efficiently and well. And that's not always guaranteed. So that's lesson number 3. Lesson number 4, I'm obviously not the best judge of character when it comes to picking tenants and roommates. And as I said before, I wish I would have just used Furnished Finder. That's the lesson I learned with this, that I actually used Furnished Finder when I bought my current house and I had people living in my spare bedroom, and I got 3 people from Furnished Finder and they were all great. They all paid their rent on time. They were all relatively clean. And 2 of them I hardly ever saw because one was a night nurse and one was a night radiology tech, and they worked at a hospital. And so I never saw them. And it was great. And I didn't have to worry about them moving in and having their stuff here. Furnished Finder is obviously in the name. You provide a furnished place for them. So they're just plugging into your place and then they leave. They leave after 3 months. All of my tenants/roommates left after 3 months. And so even if I wasn't really jiving with them, I didn't have to deal with a whole year of them. And so that was really great. I also tried Airbnb a little bit too, which was nice. I met a good friend through Airbnb as well, which was really cool. But yeah, I'm not a good judge of character when it comes to finding a full-time, like long-term tenant. So I don't trust myself to do that. So if I were ever to become a landlord again, I would definitely outsource that to a property management company because I just don't know what I'm doing. And I think the last lesson is, despite the condo being a pain for basically the entire time I lived there, I made a ton of money from the sale. So it's hard to regret buying it because it really did jumpstart my ability to purchase property. So as I said, I bought the place for $140,000 and sold it for $250,000. I only lived there for 2 years. I lived there from December 2019 to June 2022. And so I only owned it for 2.5 years and I made $100,000 off of it. And so it's hard to regret that because even though all of that's in my house now, and I know I said that I spent $55,000 on this house, but it is building the equity of this house. So right now, my current home, what it's worth versus how much I have on the loan is over $100,000 as well. And so, and it's growing every year because we had a little bit of slowdown when the interest rates went up, but it's coming back. I think my property is now worth $430,000 and my loan, I have 311 left. So that's $140,000 of equity I have in the house. And so it's just nice to know that this buying the condo kickstarted me into being able to own a home and roll that equity into the next one, which is what I'm going to do when I buy my next property. So, yeah, that's basically the lessons that I got from buying property, owning property. I'd love to hear if anybody else has similar stories, because maybe I'm just doing everything wrong, but I find homeownership to be very challenging. While on the other hand, it's nice to have the autonomy at the same time. But it does make me wonder, if I reach financial independence, if we want to rent a place or if we want to buy. I'm not sure, because I have friends right now who are living in a home that they absolutely adore and they're renting it. And they did not plan to ever leave. They were like, we're going to rent it forever. And now the owners want to sell it. And unfortunately, they cannot buy it for what they want to sell it for, because, as I said, during the last few years, real estate in this area has just skyrocketed. And so the rent that they're paying for the place is way under market value for what the owners would get for selling it. And so they have to leave at the end of their lease. And they either have to rent another place, and now rents are much higher. There's no way they're going to be able to get a house that's the same caliber in the same area for what they're renting it now, or they have to buy the place and they can't afford to buy it. And so they're moving back in with their parents so that they can save money so they can buy a place. And that sucks. I don't want to be at the whim of a landlord like that. So autonomy is worth quite a bit. And the lesson that I've learned with this home is, maybe don't buy one that's so old, and definitely buy one in an area that I want to stay in for a long period of time, and also buy one that meets my needs a little bit better. This house is, I love it. It's really cute and quaint, but it's a little too small for the fact that we do want to start a family and we want to have at least 2 kids. We might have more. And with 2 bedrooms and 4 people, that's not really going to work for the long term. So I think that's the lesson going into the next property, and also just making sure that I don't feel pressured into buying, because I think that's kind of also what got me in both instances, where I just felt pressured to buy. And now that I'm living in a home that pretty much works just fine, I don't feel pressured to buy anything anytime soon. I don't think I'll sell this house or move for another at least 5 years. Even when I start looking, I'm not going to let pressure get to me, or I'm going to try not to. It's hard to say that now. And then when I get into it, I'm like, oh my God, I need this house. I have to get it right now. Oh my God. So that could happen. But I'm going to try really hard to be like, okay, stay calm and cool and collected. The lucky thing is I'm going to have a partner, and at that time, he'll be my spouse. And he is very level-headed when it comes to this kind of stuff. So he will be able to be like, okay, wait, let's look at the gross things about this house. What don't we like about this house? So I'll have somebody with me the next time around, and we'll be able to make that decision together. And we also will be able to buy something together. And I think it's going to be a lot easier. I think every time you buy it, you just learn more. And so it's just, I think it's going to be a lot easier the next time around. I'll let y'all know when it happens. But yeah, so that's it for Meghan's money lessons today. Let me know what you think about buying a home. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening to the EverydayFI podcast. If you're loving the show, here are some things you can do. Number 1, subscribe in your favorite podcast player and share the show with your friends and family. Number 2, please leave a review. I'm always looking for ways to improve the show. Number 3, check out my website, EverydayFI.com, where you can listen to all the episodes and leave comments for myself and the guest. Number 4, if you're interested in sharing your own financial independence story, you can find a submission form at everyday-fi.com/podcast. And finally, number 5, join my Patreon membership for only $5 a month at patreon.com/everydayfi podcast. This is a one-woman show, so every little bit counts. See you next time as we continue to go down the path to financial freedom.